you're all here today because of Kara. She started the first psychedelic society. She didn't call it a society, but she started the first one in our area. It's in Vancouver. They meet once a month as well. And she's got many years of experience and wisdom and pioneering through these medicines to pass on to all of us. She's got a really great, grounded, calming vibe, which is always nice. And in preparation for tonight's talk, I had a really bad trip on Sunday, so. Sometimes I'm looking forward to it. So anyway, I'll pass it on to Carol.
Thank you. I'm going to try and pitch my voice to the back of the room, and I hope you can hear me. If you can't, scooch up, because there's some space in the way back. So I guess I got to do my DEA disclaimer, which is I do not advocate taking any of these drugs, but if you got a batch of LSD sitting on the shelf, it isn't going to do you any good if it just sits on the shelf. So that's my disclaimer. Now, tonight we're going to talk about LSD, psychedelics, and a scary monster, and what could be more fun than that? But by the end of the evening, we will have slain the monster, and we will have its head on a stick, and we can all dance around it naked. And so that's how I begin the talk. I'm going to give a little outline about what it is I'm going to talk about, and I guess I could read the blurb here, because that works. Oh, well, yeah, there's a question to sit with, which is, and you don't have to raise hands or answer out loud, but how many people have a batch of something at home, like 20 hits of blotter, and it just sits? And you look at it, and it just sits, and it sits like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or maybe you take a half a hit, or maybe one hit, but like I'm going to address that to some degree. And so, but don't raise hands or answer. I'm going to read what I wrote for the blurb. In the 1960s, the idea of the bad trip or bummer joined the lexicon with the spreading use of LSD. The spectre of the bad trip keeps many people from a deeper exploration of the psychedelic, and people spend a lot of energy to avoid a bad trip. So that's what I'm going to talk about, is the bad trip. Now that leads right into the work of Dr. Stanislav Grof. How many people are at all familiar with Stan Grof's work? Okay, that's fantastic. So I'll just do an outline here of, for those who don't know, how he came about to do what he did and what makes Grof special. And so he was trained as an MD psychiatrist in Czechoslovakia in the 50s, and his group received some Sandoz LSD in 1954 when it was just a research chemical. And so they said, well, here, try this stuff. We know it's psychoactive. See what you can do with it. So anyway, his preceptor, Rubicek, organized a research group on volunteers, and they started to monkey with LSD. And Stan got interested and became an observer, but he wasn't yet the full tenured doctor, so he couldn't participate, but once he was, he did. And he had been doing, he'd been trained in more or less Freudian analysis, and he had gone through his own analysis, and his opinion of analysis was, it takes too long, it costs too much, and it's not effective. And he was getting disenchanted with the whole psychological healing business until he had LSD, and it said it just changed everything for him. What makes Stan Grof unique is that he was doing clinical work over a longitudinal time frame with individuals, like through 100 sessions with one individual. Now, the work done in the United States in the 50s and 60s was good that it was done, but it was usually 1 or 2 high-dose sessions, like taking alcoholics and just blasting them one time and then they stop drinking or something. And that was all good information, but it really didn't get to the deeper levels of what these drugs can do. And so I don't know of anyone, like MAPS, 3 MDMA sessions. Well, that's a down payment, people. For a lot of people, that's just a down payment. That just gets your foot in the door a little bit. And so the real trick to Grof is he worked with people as they worked down through their personal history, as they worked down through birth stuff, and went completely through it. And what he found was, for a lot of people, they had a final kind of climactic integration, and then that stuff didn't come up anymore. They went on to other things, both in the sessions and in life. And I call that true healing. Now, and that's something that, in my opinion, Grof was up to differential calculus, and the people here right now redoing this research are monkeying around with algebra. And not to put them down at all, but this is my opinion, so I have one. So it was the long-term number of sessions that he would do with people. He supervised over 3,000 sessions. And these were people in the 50s who had been survivors of sexual abuse, physical abuse, people traumatized during World War II. They came with real symptoms. Now, an interesting part of Grof's work is that the clinicians also went through the program. They weren't just people in lab coats telling the rats to do this or that. And although these people weren't psychologically in distress, everyone had some amount of birth stuff come up. And it may be resolved in 3 sessions or something, is what he said. But everybody had a little bit of it. And so the basic thesis of this talk is there's no such thing as a bad trip. However, you may disturb and start to unearth trauma that you don't know you have. And I'm going to contend that's what accounts for a bad trip. And there's only really one thing I can think of that would be legitimately a bad trip, and I'll talk about that later because it's something you have to really try and do that I think is a little stupid. But so that's the basic thesis. So let's talk about Stan's work. Grof observed many sessions, and here's a book that he wrote. It's called Realms of the Human Unconscious, which is observations from LSD's research. He doesn't ask you to believe anything here. He just writes down, well, we see this, we've seen this kind of pattern, we've seen that kind of pattern. At this stage, these kinds of things come up. And it's a beautiful primer for all this kind of work. I'll talk more about that later. But anyway, he formed up a basic cartography. And he gave it 4 levels. And one level is you drop acid and you see transformations in the environment. The wallpaper starts to look like swimming fish, and you watch TV and colors and blobs and things. That's an aesthetic level. Or you look at the carpet and you start to see faces swirling and moving around in the carpet. That's the upper level of LSD activity. And I made a drawing here many years ago. I call it the mandala of death. And there's a couple of copies on each. There's a couple of copies on each table. You can pass them around and look at it. I'll talk about that a little later. It's one of the things that goes bump in the night. Do I sound like I'm having a good time? Anyway.
I am.
So anyway, the first level is the aesthetic level. That's where you just see goofy stuff, and the trees are breathing. And how many have seen trees breathing?
Please.
Okay, yeah. Well, shit, I'm talking to the real people here. The next level is personal historical. Now, this is where you were beaten as an infant or raped as a teenager, whatever it is that was done in a personal historical context. Sometimes it's not violence, but your parents were always raging at each other and you shrunk away as a human being, let's say. All those things can form up unconsciously held stresses and trauma around it. And that's the personal level. That's your historical life story. Trauma. I should talk about trauma. Trauma is where you have incomplete experiences lodged in your nervous system, in your body, in your tissues, in your mind, in your psyche, but they're not integrated. You may remember none of it, part of it. You may remember parts of a trauma, but what you don't remember is how you felt about it. You remember it, but it's drained of significance. And when you get to the significance, things can explode. when you really see how you felt about it, not how they felt about it. And that's a distinction. So anyway, there's a historical level. Then the third level is perinatal experience, which is aspects of the birth experience that are also unconsciously held. And there's good reasons for that. I mean, a lot of births are accompanied by anesthetic. So you as a baby were not conscious of the process, but you were going through it. Excuse me, I gotta get some water. And so, perinatal experience is a big part of it. Let's see, what did I say here? Physical pain, intense discomfort, scenes of death and dying, also experiences of oceanic unity are part of this matrix. He calls them matrices. There's the personal history matrix, the birth matrix, and the content of these levels can be very, very widely varied. They cover a lot of territory, but it tends to group around something. And the birth groups around birth, although it can go off in many directions and kind of be disguised at times. It is a pretty distinct level that one can go into. And then the fourth realm is the transpersonal realm, and that's where you meet Jesus, or you meet a shamanic figure, or you travel into the cosmos, or you become a tree, or you talk with animals, or whatever it is. And that's all cool stuff. That's the kind of the fun stuff. And so let's see, those are the four levels. So where am I going? So let's see, what's the natural question here? Why bother with this stuff? No, that's what we'll get to. So I'm not saying everybody has trauma. I'm saying it's really common in this culture. Kids are treated with violence, and I think what I've seen is that when I was in my 20s, I kind of remembered the violence at age 5, 6, 7, and 8. As I've done work with LSD and other things, I started to remember the violence at 18 months. I started to remember the violence at 10 months. And those experiences were really prototypes for my relationships with people. So that's where the rub is. So I'm not going to presume to say, oh, you all have trauma out here and you got to work on it now. That's not what I'm saying. But the rub really is that if you monkey with psychedelics and you have suppressed trauma, you may just disturb it and it may start to come out. And that is what is accounted for almost all of what we've heard about a bad trip. Now, the mandala of death, that I hope you could pass that around. I made like 20 copies. But when I first I've covered a lot of territory already. When I first started doing deep work with LSD in the late 80s, for a couple of hours I would be squeezed down into this thing, and this thing had these kind of shapes and images that were chattering and had teeth and wings were flapping, and it was like a really visage of terror kind of thing. And I would be being squeezed, and this was on towards birth stuff, by the way. You could almost say that the being corkscrewed down into that is like a tear of the birth canal or something. But in any case, if you saw something like that and you had no idea, like, what the hell is this, you'd go, oh man, I'm being fucked up. And you know, I've heard people who, they saw the devil and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, really? You know, I've been out there a lot of times and I've never met evil with a capital E. It just hasn't happened. But I feel like I've been prepared with how weird and awful it can be for very good reasons, rather than having my mind make up something purely from religious training or something that comes on unconsciously. And so anyway, that thing was a constant companion for about the first 8 journeys. And like I say, you could construe that as being real scary, get me out of here. And at a certain point, I went into that thing and I looked at it, and it was the same as it was the last time. And I said, I've seen you before. Is that all you got? And it vanished like smoke. It just went, and it was gone. It's never come back. And so, you know, these things come and they go. Where are we at here? So we've covered Grof. Why bother with this stuff? Well, like I say, I think that, well, yeah, here's the thing. Here's one of the things. Really interesting shit happens when you take about 5 or 6 hits of blotter all at once. That's where you get to like go through a death experience. On the other side are spiritual experiences like the light or Buddha or infinite Christ consciousness. Spirits come and talk with you. A lot of that stuff happens when you take a pretty good handful of this stuff. And if you're taking a half a hit or a hit, mostly you're not going to get that experience. However, when you do take larger doses, you run the risks of unearthing some genuinely horrifying and painful stuff. And so, although we'll slay the dragon of the myth, there still are dragons, but they're your dragons. And I've done, I don't know, since 1986 or 7, I've probably done about 150 acid trips and 150 seed journeys on the Morning Glory seeds. And these are high dose experiences. And I've never met anything evil. I've met parts of myself that have been real difficult. I've met a lot of pain and stupid amounts of pain and stuff that'd be easier just to die than go through. But the point is, I was already armed with some idea what it was. And there's a linguistic principle here, which is it's easy to not go into these things. And if you've read something like this, even though the initial reading is an intellectual exercise, you're just reading through a book, right? It allows a space into which these experiences can start to download. Now, you may not want them, but that's what it does. It primes the pump. And for me, I got onto this stuff in 1986. A friend of mine called me up and said, "Well, I got this MDMA stuff, and you ought to try it." And I said, "Yeah, did shit like that in high school." No. He said, "You got to try this. You bring something back from it." And I said, "Well, okay." And so, maybe on about the fourth or fifth experience in, I started to get really weighed down and tired. And I saw a visual like I was zooming down a corridor or a tunnel that had almost my life flashing on it. Not a life review. It's way too fast and superficial for that. But I watched all these pictures go by. And I could see how everything that was going by was somehow related to how come I hurt so much. And at the end of that corridor, I flopped, my body image had shrunk to infant. I felt big head, infant body image. That happens a lot when you get down into it. And it's very clear when that happens. Anyway, and I was flopped onto the bassinet at the hospital after being born. I was completely exhausted. I could hardly breathe. And that was a birth experience. That was a piece of the birth experience, kind of a flyby that would be fleshed out in detail later. And so by chance, a friend of a friend loaned her this book, and she gave this book to me. This just flopped in my lap. And I started reading, and I said, well, that's the shit. That's what I went through. And so I read on, and and spent a lot of time with it. But because I've read that, it's allowed me to allow this stuff, which is really, really, really shitty at times, to let this stuff come out. And sometimes it's just howling pain to do that. Trauma, my maxim is this: trauma is traumatic. And but it's allowed it to come out. And I've seen this work a lot of times by things that I've read help a particular part of a trip download, help it open up. So what you read may be intellectual, but in the trip, it can swing into play and be really, really important. Yeah?
What was that book called again?
It's Realms of the Human Unconscious. Yeah, you can get a used copy on Amazon for about $15. It's not hard to come by. I don't know if it's in print, but they're around. It's not a problem.
It's in print.
It's in print.
Yeah.
It's in print?
Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, I can verify so much of the stuff that's in there because I've been working on this a long time, and I'm down really deep into the birth stuff. I would say that the unconscious levels I'm getting to aren't really deeper, but they're more lateral. It's like I'm in the basement and I'm cleaning it out. I don't feel like I'm drilling down too much deeper. And here's the thing about trauma. When trauma comes up, it doesn't come up orderly. It wasn't laid down in an orderly fashion. It was laid down chaotically. So when it first comes up, like a new, he calls them constellations. When a new constellation starts to surface, it's chaotic. I mean, I remember one seed trip. The little seeds can kick your ass, by the way. They're free, too. Jesus Christ. I was laying on the floor, and I was just enveloped by these blue and purple, and my eyes closed, jagged swirls. And sound was distorted. It was like bits and pieces of distorted syllables and crap. And I'm laying there, and I'm going like, this is all shit. Not only was it shit, but there was nowhere to hang your hat. I mean, it was just, the blue buzzing confusion. And I was laying there thinking, if somebody wasn't like a little bit primed for this one, they'd be on the phone. Somebody come and get me, because this really sucks. And that thought went through my head, but I've been there a lot of times, so it's like, yeah, okay, well, this is another one of them. And it lasted quite a while, and I was marveling at how chaotic and there was just nothing that you could figure out from it. But after a while, it started to devolve into swastikas and images of war. And my father was German, so what started to come out of that after a while was his rage. And I started to be able to at least start to understand what this cloud of chaos was, and start to have some idea of what it was related to. Because when it first came out, it was just like, who knows? And so one of the things about trauma, and this is what makes it probably, this is what can make it really difficult, or I don't want to say dangerous, but yeah, if you're not prepared, there could be some danger in it from just being scared to death, is that it comes up chaotically. It is not recognizable necessarily. And you have to kind of play an archaeologist with it. You have to kind of breathe with it and let it be, let it swirl, let it do its thing, and maybe you'll start to do some pattern recognition, start to see, well, what is this, and tease out, not actively, but kind of passively tease out meaning by letting it do its thing and smelling it, and thinking a little bit about it, and like that. And that's kind of the trick to it, because you can't force meaning on these things. The meaning has to kind of dawn on you after you You watch it for a while. You be with it for a while. And so that's the nature of emerging trauma. When pieces integrate, there's often just a clap of self that comes out of it. Like, man, I have let this thing go. My God, what a weight, you know. And yeah, questions are okay while I'm talking. If you really got one, yes.
So I hear you saying that even though you have bad trips and you work through trauma, you trust that you actually work through the trauma. I always worry that I make just things worse, like I re-traumatize myself, or that it doesn't, that I don't work through, I guess, in the end.
Yeah. Can I say? Well, one, for me, I could speak for me. I know that talking to a therapist 55 minutes a month or something is never going to do the job. So I take the risk because, as far as I can tell in this lifetime, that's about my best shot at it. And so I've set it up so that I can do this work at home. I have a soundproof modified cupboard in the house, a closet, where I can go in there and scream my head off and nobody can hear me. And
that's pretty cool.
huh?
I've never heard someone do that in their house before. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I have a soundproof. And, I take my drugs seriously. Well, the truth is that I make unearthly sounds that sound like someone's being murdered, you know, with a meat cleaver. And it's just the truth. So I don't want people hearing it. I don't want someone knocking on the door, are you okay? Or here's the police or something. Oh, shit. And so yeah, the soundproof for me. I couldn't do this in an apartment. There'd be no possibility of it because the noise level, which occurs at some point during a trip. I mean, I have trips I call cat in the sack trip. You put a cat in a burlap bag and you slap it on the concrete for a couple hours. That's what the trip is like. Yeah.
How do you know when to believe what you think about what when you're trying to make sense of the trauma?
Yeah. Well, a lot of it's pretty self-evident, and the emotions are really very real. Mm-hmm. The memories link up to what I can remember, so it's really, did everybody get the question? How do I know what the shit that I'm going through is real? And the traumatic stuff that I go through in the LSD experience and the seeds, it relates to things I knew about. And so it isn't like all of a sudden I'm figuring out I hate my parents or something. No, I remember being whipped with a belt when I was 3. And what really starts to come out in a psychedelic trip is, what were they really doing to be beating up a 3-year-old? Why would adults be doing that? And that was a well-established pattern by then. So then it becomes, well, why were they beating up a 2-year-old? And so, you know, you go into it and it makes sense. And I've learned to trust myself. And when things resolve, I mean, it's just this clunk that is so visceral. I don't know how to describe it, but I mean, I just break down and cry because, like, oh God, can I just let this go? You know, it's like that. So, yeah, that's a good question, and I think it's a question you answer for yourself. I went around the bend a while back, so I don't really worry about that one anymore. But, oh, yeah, Ching.
Are you saying that these things emerge, play out, and resolve and integrate all in one journey?
Oh, hell no. No. Pieces come up. Sometimes there's a resolution. I've got about probably 6 major themes that I work with in a journey. And as they go along, aspects can resolve. And it's almost like a fractal thing, but it's moving the other way. It's moving towards less fractals. So you can clear out this level over here, and you can clear this one, and then those two clear together. It kind of goes like that.
In sequential journeys?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they link together, and the themes are there. So that's been my experience. Yeah, these things definitely link together, and you'll see the same thing or you'll see more of a thing you've already seen, but at a deeper level with more of the emotion you're able to integrate around it. Sometimes the first time you go through something, it's a little theoretical, like just touch on it, but then you really find out how you felt about it. And one thing with trauma, like with parents, like a abusive parent or something, you'll actually go into them, you'll wear their psyche, and you will experience their rage, their dysfunction. And it's a whole circle. It's called a panoramic experience, where there's your part, there's your mom's part. Let's say she didn't do anything, so you have your betrayal with her, and that's a visceral thing. Then you'll get into her. I'm talking about my family. She drank to not have to hear and feel what was going on in the family. So then there was all her dysfunction and incapability because she was sexually abused as a child. So then there's that. Then my father's rage, and you go through each person till the whole picture is fleshed out. You will know them better than they knew themselves. I guarantee that. Yeah, you had a question.
Did you ever find that you bring their personas out with you? Can you come out of it?
Yeah,
Or
really.
that should stay?
Not any more than anyone. I mean, there's times when you find like, Dad, I just did what my mother did. You know, I mean, that's
Well, yeah.
natural human thing. But no, I don't walk out like some kind of, like I put them on permanently. No. Yeah. Yes.
It sounds like you're doing this in isolation.
I do these alone.
Is there any experience? Have you had any experience with a guide or a therapist
Yeah.
under LSD? Is there any
know,
value, you think?
I haven't done therapeutic work with a therapist. It's just too expensive. But I had a real fortunate thing in the late 80s. That same friend that helped me get the MDMA, we invested in 1,000 hits of acid, and we split it up. And so he had more experience than me, and I trusted him. So I started to do what I call therapeutic work at his house. And so I was able to do some pretty high-dose LSD experiences about 8 times at his place. Like the first trip, I dropped 7 hits. And at about 3 hours, you're like going like, I really regret having done that. Yeah. It felt like my brain had broken in some kind of way that I could never remember it not being broken in this horrible way. And it was just getting worse. And I just, it was just like, it was awful in a way that I couldn't have imagined it would be awful. And so I'm laying there on the floor, curled up, just going like, oh. And that went on for hours, and then I finally let go through exhaustion and just being worn down, and I don't know, something inside let go. And then there was light. There was the light. And I went, holy shit. And that's another thing about the higher dose experiences, which is you can break through to the light, the God of your choice, but you have to really come out of your ego to do it. And when your ego is collapsing for the first few times, that's really painful. It doesn't want to do it through habit. And I think just through because we're used to having a continuity. There's a moment after this moment. I know who I am. I know what the room is. We're used to that. That's how we're. It's called a psychological homeostasis, right? Like a cat wants to be upright on its feet. Well, you're trying to turn the cat upside down, and you just don't want to go there. And it was like I felt like a photograph. You know, if you throw a color photo in the fire and the heat's behind it and the colors drain out, and then pretty soon it starts to flake and crumble. Well, that was me. I was flaking and just crumbling, and I was trying to hold that from happening behind 7 hits of acid. and eventually I let go, and it just crumbled. Time stops. Your continuity stops, and then there's like Christ and light and whatever else happens in that space according to your own predilection. And those first 8 trips allowed me to take big acid trips, get the shit kicked out of me, understand how rough it could be in no uncertain terms. I think those are some of the roughest trips I ever went through. And I got in and got bloody. You know, the biggest single trip I did there was 13 hits. And the problem was it lasted too long. It was 16 hours. I was beat after 8 or 9 hours. And that was enough. But I got to see what really goes on. And I mean, I hit spiritual dimensions every time I go out, whether it's 200 micrograms or 500, because I've broken that wall down. And what used to be a real dramatic crumbling of the ego and all this stuff, now I find that I make that transition only by finding out that I've made it. Oh, I'm over here now, and there's God and whatever else. Because it's about the work for me. It's about the work on this stuff, the psychological stuff. God shows up and, hey, how's it going? And it's true though. I mean, after a couple hundred times, like, yeah, okay, there's more God. But there's been a communication. It's like, it's there. We'll get to it. This is the work now, and I understand. Okay, I get it. Yeah, Gene.
So I appreciate your descriptions of how, as these things unfold, as they begin to present themselves, how chaotic that is, and it takes a while for things to start to kind of make sense. Back to Grof and his book, and I also appreciate what you said about having like a roadmap or whatever, like, okay, to be able to understand what to expect. But so did Grof describe in all of those clinical settings anything that we would, in the vernacular kind of consider to be bad trips? Did any of these people in those settings have what we might consider to be, the bad trip, the classic Hollywood version? Does he describe anything like that?
I want to say no. There was a couple of things he wrote about. One is he had certain people who just didn't ever really usefully integrate what was going on, and the work was not effective. He did talk about some pretty extreme stuff people went through. He did not talk about someone ending up a vegetable or something, permanently convinced they were an orange. And so that's what I know. Are there casualties? I mean, yeah, if you're schizophrenic or just barely got it wired together, you probably shouldn't monkey with this stuff. And I'm half German and half Polish, so I'm pretty solidly wired up. It takes a lot to get me to unwire. Yeah, there was a question in the back. Okay. Yeah.
Earlier you mentioned that you have like 6 or 7 themes that you work with.
Yeah.
And I was curious if these themes were personal based, or if they might have been more of a universal in nature?
Okay. Most of them are personal. There's, the endless abuse of childhood, alcoholic family, violent. So there's a lot there. The birth stuff is a theme. When I was 18, I was in a fatal car accident. The driver was killed. My head bashed the windshield out. And so that's a theme that comes up because I really was not allowed to grieve that at the time. And so the way these experiences also work is holographic. So I can be working on part of the childhood violence where I'm being smashed in the head by my father, and that'll like spin around for a while and then go down to birth where you're getting crunched in the birth canal, and that'll spin around and go back into bits and pieces of that car collision coming out. And it's holographic because it'll spin back and forth through time like this. And so that things are holographic. It's not cut and dried. Birth bleeds into, or I should say, history can bleed into birth back and forth. I would say there's a lot of universal religious stuff that I go through. I was not from a religious family, but I've seen enough of God to know two things. God exists, and I have no clue what God wants. The more I see of all this stuff, the less I have any idea that... Terence McKenna said, whoever said talking monkeys should understand the cosmos. And so I'm basically learning to be a better monkey. Oh yeah, the monkey's nervous system is a theme. The culture is completely anathema to the needs of a primate nervous system. And so that's a big theme because the abuse of childhood was, some of it was active, but a lot of it was just how to make a baby monkey unhappy. And so there's a theme. And so, yeah, some of them I think are at the level of culture, archetypal, you could say. Some are completely personal. And the birth stuff, is interesting because you have the birth and death work together, but that's also where you go, like on one journey, some of the birth scenes are very constrictive, very oppressive, which would be you're jammed in the birth canal, there's no exit, there's just suffering. And I was having this vision of a panorama, a landscape of just skulls. Just this gray and black expanse of skulls. And I'm going along, and then eventually I come up to Christ on the cross in black and white, just this figure writhing on a cross. It's nothing but a picture of suffering. And you go, well, that sucks. And then the thing is that I know enough to stay in it. You're in that shit, just stay there. And then eventually the kind of the black fell away, and then there was just this explosion of light. It's like I was able to accept the universality of it and stop fighting in that moment. And then light just blasted through. There's this suffering acceptance thing that happens too in those spaces. What I'm trying to say is it's worthwhile to get into those levels around the birth stuff because that's where a lot of that transcendent stuff seems to pick up. It seems to pick up at that point. Yes?
Hi. So do you go into these therapeutic, okay, I guess it's kind of a two-part question. Do you go into each trip with the intent of it being therapeutic, and if so or not? Do you go in there with an intent to explore your issues, and do you have tools that you use, like psychological tools, or like questions that you ask your experience to like get something out of it?
Yeah.
To move forward?
I say a prayer. I say, Great Spirit, take me by the hand, show me what I need to see, and help me be humble. And then that's it. And I say, take off the emergency brake, put the car in neutral, and get your hands off the steering wheel. That's about what you have to do. If you can really let go, your greater self or greater intellect will take you where you need. It'll go where the friction is. Let's put it that way. It doesn't take any real trick to go to these places because that's where the energy's blocked up, and the process will take you right there.
Magnets.
Yeah, yeah, it's magnetic that way, and you have to work at it to not go there. And I've talked to a lot of people. Well, oh yeah, I took some acid, and there was this place. I just stayed around it, all night long. I worked really hard, and I just smoked cigarettes, and I wasn't going to go there. Well, okay, but it was there to be gone to. And yeah.
In your soundproof closet, are you just doing silent darkness?
Silent darkness?
Yeah, or are you using music?
Oh, I don't use music while, once in a while, way at the end, I'll put some music on.
Okay.
Usually not. Now, and I'm not making that right or wrong. It's just, it's too much paraphernalia because a lot of times in a journey, I'll start to do cross-body movements for neural reasons. It feels like the thing to do. So I'll come out and I'll do these movements and, to help the brain to integrate across the hemispheres. So, yeah. And I'm anything but silent in there. So I'm not trying to meditate. Usually, after 20 or 30 minutes, I'm in the shed. So it's calling the shots, really. Yeah.
So if the entire trip is set inside of your room, are you just in there the entire time?
Well, I have a whole house to wander around in.
Okay.
Yeah. But
And have you set that up specifically to help facilitate community safety in the trips? Or?
yeah, well, I put a sign on the door that says "Bad migraine, please do not disturb." I unplug the telephone and do my thing, and that works pretty well. I'm fortunate; I have a house I could do that in, and there aren't other people there, so I don't have to explain anything.
Do you ever feel like psychedelic or psychological attacks of any sort, or would you say that that's just yourself still working?
I have never experienced evil with a capital E. The difficult things that I run into is stuff out of my own stack, the best way I can put it. And I'm not saying those can't exist, but that has not been something I've run into. Only one time something weird happened. This was in San Francisco with my friend. It was kind of 2/3 of the way through a pretty big acid trip. And I'm just standing there, and all of a sudden I'm hearing with my ears this chorus of ghostly voices, like, ooh, stuff. And it was like, it wasn't coming from me. I could hear it over there. And I'm like, oh shit. That was fucked up. It was like they sounded like they were trying to scare me, whatever they were. And that was about the only independent, like, weird entity at that level. Now, I have run into saints, spirit guides, golden presences of light. Those are all great, and I've run into that a lot. I have not run into anything evil or attacking. I mean, the junk out of my own psyche is plenty, And like I say, I'm not saying those don't exist.
And have you ever taken LSD in a group setting, or have you always done independent or with your friends?
Oh, very much independent. Just from a practical standpoint. I mean, paying a shrink for 10 or 12 hours of hand holding. I mean, you could do it once, $500, $600, $700, but I mean, to keep it up, it's not possible.
Like trusted friends or anything.
Well, they would be concerned for my sanity. So, I mean, there's times when I would really like to have someone there so I could just, and get hugged and everything. But generally speaking, it's tedious, painstaking, and it's not for anybody else to be making sense of. And unless they can just be happy with sitting there reading a book and only get involved when I need them, It just doesn't make sense. It's not a group experience. You go inside deep and you stay there. Yeah.
I know it's not LSD, but do you experiment with mushrooms as much as LSD? Or?
Well, many years ago, the mushrooms said, "You're too white to hang out with us," and I haven't gone back. And I might again, but no, I haven't been with the shrooms very much at all. Yeah.
I wonder if you could speak to the integration process, and maybe Grof, I assume, or when you have a guide or someone who integrates, if he did this, or how you personally integrate these experiences and you come down off the trip and come back to life.
You integrate it while you're tripping, meaning you integrate it by being there. It isn't like you take the pieces, put it on the table, and then someone helps you put them together. Generally speaking, this stuff is self-explanatory. It's like, it starts out like a lot of physical movement for me. It's like my head's going wham, wham, wham. I'm like, well, what is this? Wham. And then pretty soon I'm going, oh, I'm experiencing I'm sensing my father's rage. Oh, I'm seeing like a scene of a room spinning. It's like you start to integrate it yourself. And you put the mystery together. I'm not saying that, and I do talk it out with friends, maybe after the fact, but you're going to put it together in the trip. You're going to walk out of the trip going like, yeah. Then you want to tell people about it. And I'm not saying there can't be a lot of value in that, and more things can tumble out later. But the heavy lifting's done in the trip. To answer your question? Yeah.
So I think it's really important, going off what we asked, to integrate after your trip is over, because during the trip, it's in order to fully let go. It's good to not focus on what's actually happening, just let it happen to you.
Yeah.
And then when you're done, it takes a lot of time sometimes to integrate what you saw in your trip.
Sure.
But I think that's where all of the information comes after.
Everybody's got their process. I can only speak, to how I do it, and yeah, Larry.
Having done terrible uses of mushrooms in particular, I find that there is a lot of integration that goes on during the experience for me. It's my own personal experience, but I also find that it opens up avenues for the next few days, the next few weeks, that things develop. I gain a sensitivity to certain things. I notice more things, and the integration is also part of what I do there is journal the entire thing afterwards.
Yeah.
So that I'm becoming aware of what I'm thinking. I'm becoming aware of what I'm experiencing more so. And a lot of these things come together, not just during the journey, but after the journey.
I would say it's absolutely true. Absolutely. Yeah.
Have you found it useful to record yourself during these sessions so that you remember better what happened? Because I find that with higher doses, it's hard. I often forget a lot of what happened, and then so that's. I'm curious if you do that.
No, I don't record. It would be incomprehensible yells and screams. Monkey yells. No, I don't record it. The pieces that fall into place during the journey, they've fallen into place even if you don't record them, or even if you don't journal later on. I find that that's been true for me. And I really don't even hardly take notes anymore. It's like, I got the sword out and I'm cutting things down. And when they're cut down, they're cut down, whether I have to remember them or not. So, yeah.
Do you think that is because the way that you have worked through so many trips, you're able to access your subconscious so much more easily, so that you don't have to write it down and remember it, like the conscious thoughts to go and change the subconscious? Do you think you immediately kind of break down that barrier? Like you're easier able to break down like the ego barrier? Or
Yeah, the more you go in there, the easier it gets. I said the cupboard used to have doors on it. There's no doors anymore.
Yeah.
And I can do MDMA. I go down into trauma stuff. You know, it's not like a nice time at the beach.
So
And,
now it's not like those conscious thoughts. You said you have these noises and stuff, which is resonant to whatever experience
Yeah,
you had,
yeah.
but it's more, do you think those are straight from your subconscious then?
Well, yeah. I'm deep in my unconscious to where a lot of it's not unconscious anymore.
Okay, yeah.
I'm cleaning it out.
Okay.
I'm going for the whole thing. And there won't be suppressed trauma anymore. Either that or I'll be dead.
So do you think you're already, what I'm saying is you're already so far into it that you don't have to take as much afterwards to integrate? It'd be more easier to integrate what you learned from the trip?
I would say that's probably true to a degree, because a lot goes on during the trip. I mean, it's happening right now as I go through. So, yeah. But if, be your own guide. Learn your own process. If it works for you to journal and take notes and then write it out the next day, to do that. I mean, I have at times journaled, at times I haven't. It's all pragmatic at that level, as far as I'm concerned. Really. Yeah.
So, so in your process, then have you found the use for like a smaller dose, like just 1 or 2 hits, then, or the?
You just left there.
I'm with you.
Here's the thing. When I'm going to commit to a whole day, like for me, a working dose of LSD now is 300 micrograms. That's like, okay, that's 7, 8 hours. It's 7 hours I'm sniffing around for a piece of toast or something. And so, as far as low dose, like I said, I'm going to commit the day to the thing. I want to get as much as I can out of it. And that may be not the best approach, I don't know. But for a while there, about a year ago, I was doing 500 microgram LSD experiences. And I backed it off to 3. And I thought, it's almost better because it's a little less turbulent. It seemed to me like it almost worked a little better because things just weren't quite so energetic. And so, 300 is kind of my idea of a microdose.
So 13, that was 1,300 when you say 13?
300.
No, but when you said that you did 13 hits.
Oh, I did 13 hits at one time.
Is that 1,300 micrograms?
Well, I don't know exactly what they were. It was either half that or 1,300. It was a lot. But it wasn't that deeper. It was just longer. That trip just lasted too long. It wasn't really fundamentally deeper in qualitative terms. So there was just no point to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I started doing this back in the 60s. There was a reason why Owsley divided up a gram into 3,600 hits, because that's roughly 277 micrograms per hit. Because it was really, a pretty sweet spot for a lot of people for having a breakthrough experience.
The 270, 300 microgram
Range.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, how about I'll get there, but how about way in the back?
What are your thoughts on schizophrenia?
I can't hear you.
What are your thoughts on schizophrenia?
What are my thoughts on schizophrenia?
Yeah. And the dangers of psychedelics and schizophrenia.
Well, like I said, if you're leaning that way, don't go there. And I don't know how to screen people that way. You know what I'm saying? But if you're already kind of hearing voices and seeing shit, you might not want to mess with the acid or any other psychedelic. But as far as what are the risks of a totally naive person not thinking that they had a problem ending up schizophrenic, I have no idea what that might be, what that risk might be. Does that answer your question? Okay. Oh, Helen.
Well, to answer that, when I was young, I lived with someone who found out they had schizophrenia, and it was months of not coming down. So I personally would not recommend it just based on my observation. But I had a question. When you've been through all these bad trips and all this trauma, it sounds like you worked through a lot. I'm curious, how has this
played out in your day-to-day life, in your relationships, and how you feel, like, what are the results that you see, if any?
Oh, that's the hard question. I'm all better now. Well, I don't think I'd be here for one thing. I think I would have ended my life a long time ago. In the late 80s, I realized just how hollowed out and left for dead I had been out of my family. And I've managed to stay alive, and I've managed to keep my health. And I'm going back to school next year. And so, I mean, I can't present like a shining light, but I wouldn't be here if I hadn't started to work on this stuff. Because there's just no life on the trauma side of the equation. There's existence, but there's not life. So I have every incentive to work on it. And fortunately, I have the time, and I don't have personal connections like a significant other that I couldn't do this work. I can roll the bones down the crap table every time. And if it goes really, really badly, it's okay. I'm not losing anything. Really not. So a long time ago, I went for broke on this stuff. And I've gotten smarter. I mean, the little seeds, I felt like in about 1-2 month period doing seed trips, I swear to God, my brain doubled. This is the most amazing thing. Just amazing. And I think it's part of staying involved and staying interested in what's going on. How about here and then here?
I guess maybe some perspective in integration, in regards to integration. What you're talking about is you go through the sludge, you have your breakthroughs, and the work is being integrated as you're going through it. And I have those experiences. Sometimes they're very somatic, sometimes they're emotional. I can feel stuff releasing.
Yeah.
And I know that, like, energetically I'm being tuned up and those things are happening. I also feel like there's a high value for a lot of people in having a guide, integration specialist, whatever you want to call it, because a lot of times, especially in a second half of a journey for me, I'm pretty ecstatic and I'm like, heart's wide open, and I really understand what I should be doing in my life. But then a couple hours later, I come back in this monkey body, and the next day, I'm stuck in this monkey body. My brain's not in that ecstatic state anymore. In implementing and integrating those lessons that I've learned about actionable steps on how to restructure, change my life, and create the life that I want based on the values I have, that I think it'd be really valuable to have an integration specialist, coach, whatever you want to call it, for that process. And not necessarily needs to be there holding my hand during, which I think is high value for newcomers, but and after the post work, I feel like for a couple weeks it'd be really great to have that support to get that work integrated and applied in clear, actionable steps in daily life.
I totally agree. I mean, part of why this has taken me so long to work through, it's been do it yourself. You know, I mean, if I could have checked into Grof's clinic, I would have done it. You know, there aren't such things. So I've had to improvise. But it's way better than nothing. You know. Yeah.
Have you sat in an ayahuasca ceremony yet?
I have not.
Are you open to it?
Around people?
I don't know if that's an appropriate question. I'm just curious. The reason I ask is that if you had, I was curious how that would.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'd be a tremendous buzzkill. I mean, I'm making a joke out of it because I love to make jokes, but I've thought about it, but there's kind of a group ethos that gets going with ayahuasca, and they really don't want someone sitting there howling and shrieking. And that's really what I've got to do. So I haven't been that interested in a group setting. I'm not saying it can't be valuable. I'm not saying that at all. Yeah, so I just can't talk about that one because I haven't done it. Yeah. What? The seeds.
Yeah, we touch more on that and how
Oh.
to use them.
Oh, the little seeds. Yeah, the little seeds are marvelous. They're more shamanic than LSD by far. They're quirkier. I'm talking about the morning glory seed, the common morning glory seed. And I get them from a seed distributor in New York, online. They say raw and untreated, and they've been really good. And these are your heavenly blue variety morning glory seed. And in fact, I'm probably going to do some tomorrow morning. It's time.
Do you eat them?
Yeah, you grind them up. You grind up the whole seed in the coffee grinder. You put it in a mug and pour in some lukewarm water. You let it sit overnight. Mix it up in the morning with maybe a little bit of orange juice, and you just drink the whole works. 5 grams is a starting dose.
Okay.
And that if you really hate it, you won't be that committed. And if it's going to speak to you, then that's a good place to start. And then you can always do more later. They're dirt cheap. I mean, for $2, you can be pinned to the floor for 10 hours.
Oh, yeah.
Great.
And now these are the morning glory seeds.
Is it similar though, like what we're signing up for?
LSA.
Lysergic acid, yeah.
But it's very different.
Yeah, that's what I was just asking if it was similar to a trip. Like, what do you expect in a journey?
Oh, wow.
Similar to LSD at all?
Here's the thing. LSD is like top chakra stuff. You know,
Yeah.
the head leads the race. The seeds grab you right here, and they pull you by the body. And it's much lower, much more emotional, much more gut, much earthier. And that's why the reputation for making you sick. The problem with the seeds is, oh, everybody throws up. Not everybody throws up. But if you aren't prepared and if you can't keep up with the emotional gut level activation of the seeds, the energy has to go somewhere, and the stomach doesn't think about it. It just says, I'm going to go upside down. I mean, spirits talk to me. Dead authors talk. James Joyce has come to me several times while I've been stoned on seeds. And there's
Do you make more noise with the seeds because it's more emotional?
I think I get the most emotional shrieking going with LSD. The seeds are, they're second by far. Yeah.
So I've worked with seeds a bit.
Aha.
And done pretty high dose. And the comparison between LSD, the metaphor I like to use is LSD is driving down a 2-lane country road at 100 miles an hour with the fence posts and the telephone poles whipping by like this. And the seeds are going down that same country road, but you can go, oh gosh, look, that telephone pole has moss growing on it. Oh, and there's a bird up there. You know, you get to be with things longer. That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah.
It is more visceral. It's, you know, kind of first, second, third chakra stuff, where, you know, the MDMA is kind of fourth, fifth, you know, chakra stuff, and LSD's out here. They just resonate at different places.
Yeah, the thing about the seeds is, I go into a place with them where time starts to loop around on itself. You find yourself in this timeless place where all time and all space is around you somehow. And it's going backwards and forwards through time. Time's looping around, going in one ear and out your nose. A lot of weird stuff happens with time. It's much more shamanic. LSD is a very straightforward, like an Ingersoll Rand pneumatic jackhammer. We are going to jackhammer down through your shit. That's what it is. It's a tool. And for me, it's gotten to be a pretty straightforward piece of business. But the seeds are quirky. I mean, that's where the little stuff in the corners of the room start talking and little weird shit happens. You know, it's cool. It's really cool. Yeah.
I have a question for you, or for you, really. So, in my personal experience, I haven't used acid so much for healing journeys, more for fun, honestly. But the mushrooms for me have been very, like, intentionally spiritual experience. So the morning glory seeds, so where I'm going with this is it sounds like you do your experiences inside your house almost exclusively, but for me, when I've done mushrooms inside of a house, it's been not a bad experience.
Yeah.
Well, one was bad, but like being outside for me on something like mushrooms is
Yeah.
very important. And I was
Yeah.
wondering if it's the same for the morning glory seed. You say it's very shamanic, and like doing shamanic things inside is.
Yeah.
can't
I would
be
let
bothered.
I would just let your heart be your guide on that one very easily. I mean, I do try to get outside when the weather allows it, when I'm more at the end of the journey, because I don't want to be screaming in the backyard.
That's what camping trips are.
You know, but yeah, absolutely. Let your pattern unfold for you. I mean, there's no wrong way to do this stuff, really. Oh, there is one wrong way. I'm gonna bring up the one bad trip that might be real, and that is, if you try to work really, really focused, intentional magic, and you're really, really stoned, and you're really not clear in yourself, you can backfire some pretty weird energy. And there's times when I've started to see reality come pretty far unraveled, you know, and I'm going like, you could do something with that, and I back off. I back off because I'm not done with the trauma stuff. And if you start to really shift reality's gears around you, and you're not clear of trauma and you're not integrated, then you're going to get a weird mix of the two. And so I would consider that could end up being weird, and that's intentional. And I don't want to go into those places, although I've seen the potential for it. And so I would say that could be something that could be weird. Yeah.
Maybe this is just a personal question.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, since you have so much experience, do you have maybe a plan of using psychedelics as you like die, like transition? Like, would you prefer that or no?
What's the question?
Like almost like when you use the LSD and you die?
Yeah, like to kind of transition from this life. Like, is that something that?
I think that's a great idea. Aldous Huxley did it. I don't know how many of you read Castaneda, but Juan talks about the psychedelic can bring you to the ally. Now, the ally is a spiritual power dimension. And Juan's talking about how you get to that dimension. And he says at some point you don't need the substance to become one with the ally. It's my hope I can become one with the ally before I die. So it won't make any difference at that point. But if I'm still stuck, yeah, hell yeah.
How do you feel that you're closer to that than you were closer to
I've
being
come
one?
through miles, cubic miles of shit. Yeah, I'm in the tail end of this thing as far as I'm concerned. I better be. I'm getting old. Yeah, and then back here.
Can you talk more on becoming one with the ally?
Yeah. Let's see, what can I say about that? I keep brushing up against something infinite that is real and has tremendous energy, power, and scale. And I brush into it a little bit at a time, because if you really brush into it too hard, you will shatter. And so I'm gradually able to brush into it more and more. And then I back off. And then we come back again. Spend a little more time there. So that process keeps deepening. And at some point, I will just be able to be there with that.
Do you think it's loss of ego to become one with it?
There is a loss. There is a loss because your mind sort of has to accept a new scale of things. You know, one says that the world won't be there when you get back because your idea of the world will have changed. And yeah, and I've been in that really lonely place where you start to see your idea of the world changing, and it's agonizing. It's an agonizing place because you're really alone standing out on that promontory. It's just you and like some powerful stuff out there. Over here.
The morning glory seeds, are they the same ones that seed the nursery?
Yeah, except that I buy them from a distributor that makes a big deal out of them being raw and untreated. Because there was a rumor that some places put fungicides and crap on the seeds, and you don't want to eat that. So, Harris.
Getting them organically.
Yeah.
Online.
But yeah, it's a company called Harris, Harris. Harris in New York. And they're dirt cheap. A pound is like $45. And that'll keep you stoned for months. And yeah.
Just one caution along that line for us guys, having experienced that, don't buy a lot of them until you get the experience.
Yeah.
Because for guys, it can be a really nasty trip.
Yeah, there is a caveat about the seeds. It has been my experience that women have a much better time with them than men. And I, you know, I don't know why that is exactly, except that perhaps women are more able to flow with more of body-centric emotion and stuff. I mean, not to get into the whole cultural spiral that could be. And yeah.
You experienced with Hawaiian baby woodrow seeds?
I got a bag of them. A friend gave me some, and I've never done them. So, but it's ostensibly the same active ingredients. I bet they're a little different, but I wouldn't think they're that different. You don't have to eat nearly as many of them. They're much more potent per seed.
What was the question?
Hawaiian baby woodrow seeds are another cousin of the morning glory in terms of the active ingredients. And you don't have to take nearly as many. They're much more potent per seed.
Which is more potent?
The Hawaiian baby woodrows. And Alan.
Do you have experiences personally or through your readings of visiting ancestors in psychedelic experiences?
Well, I certainly get in touch with the spirits of people. Whether that's a psychological representation of my parents, but I mean, James Joyce has showed up, for Christ's sakes. He's been dead for 80 years.
How did you know it was him?
Oh, I knew. It was unmistakable. You could just taste it. Yeah, it was for sure. And I was in a multi-dimensional place at that point, and it was just like I just got surrounded by Joyce. And, well, I'd been reading Finnegan's Wake at the time, and that'll fuck up your head, too. I wrote a little story where God and Satan are talking, and Satan mentions James Joyce, and God says, you know, I tried to read that book, Finnegan's Wake, and I just couldn't make head or tails out of it. Oh, God. Yeah.
I was wondering, so Terrence kind of said when you received the message, it came up the phone. And you said that when you took mushrooms, that wasn't what you were white. And then how did you distinguish that from LSD being unpacking trauma, unearthing trauma?
Yeah, at the time I wasn't onto this stuff. And I had a really, really rough mushroom experience. It was just incomprehensibly awful. And I just never went back.
Before you had LSD ever, you tried psilocybin?
Not ever, but really just the way it worked out, my adult work started with the availability of LSD. And I had also read this already, so this is just kind of the avenue that's open. I make no pronouncement. I could probably do mushrooms now and get much more out of it. I'm not afraid to go back to them. It just hasn't really come up. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you experimented with DMT if your goal is to become one with?
No, I haven't. It doesn't last long enough.
It helps.
I make no statement on DMT. I'm not that curious because the stuff I work with, I spend hours brewing. You know, I percolate, and then things tease out. And so maybe it's a prejudice of mine, but DMT seems like kind of being shot over your own personal world and out into some other dimension. Well, I don't need to know about that so much. I'm working on my own stack here.
I've learned that it correlates though, for my experience.
Yeah, I believe me, I'm not making pronouncements. If something's working, do more. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I'd just like to step back to one of the things we were talking about earlier, and that's about having a guide. Having had that experience and also in group, that there are some definite benefits to that, a number of benefits to having a guide, particularly if you're not really familiar with the territory and what it's all about.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I mean, I had the real good fortune to have someone I trusted to shotgun me for about 8 big journeys, and that was a wonderful thing. It got me to get my feet wet, and that was important. Now I don't know how many people want to go deeper with psychedelics. If you do, I recommend reading this book. But because almost every awful thing that you could run into is in here, and that's an advantage so that you don't get blindsided. Because when things go to shit, instead of, oh no, this shouldn't be happening, like, the cosmic bird is shit on me or something. No, this is something out of me. On the other hand, by reading this, it helps these things unpack. So it's a double-edged sword. It's a place I wouldn't monkey with unless you really have some idea that you want to go in there or you need to go in there, and that you're going to do it. Otherwise, don't unpack this stuff. Don't half unpack it. That's a mistake. I can say that. Well, hell. Yeah.
You mentioned Grof's research. Could you talk about his description of what we might call bad trips, or his described frequency of them, or some information on his study?
Well, if you've been, the work by Grof that I've read is all about bad trips. So everybody that he worked with was having bad trips. Only they're not bad trips, they are the unfoldment of traumatic material. And so the gamut of that experience is wide. And I recommend, read one of his books to see what specific experiences come up.
Do you recall what kind of doses they were using in the clinical setting?
200-300.
Okay.
That's just off the top of my head, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
When dealing with the trauma stuff, and the bad trips, did you have to, at least in the beginning, kind of wade through some, maybe nebulous trips, or were they all kind of somewhat resolved in the end, where you're like, oh, that's what this is about? Or did you have some trips where you're just like, I have no idea what this is?
Rarely no idea. Usually usually something comes clear during every trip, and sometimes new stuff is starting to bubble up. But after a while, you get. I've got themes that are pretty well developed. I mean, it's not like something new and completely surprising comes up that, like, all out of the blue. I don't think that's going to happen at this point. And so, yeah, not everything gets resolved in one journey, and not everything that comes up in that journey is resolved. And that's frustrating, because sometimes, you know, you get all done and it's like, fuck, you know, it's still awful. But pieces do fall into place during every journey also. And when those go click, it's mind-blowing. So it's well worth the price of admission. But that's something you got to start to work out for yourself, how that works. Last question. Okay. Yeah.
You mentioned something around the lines of putting the car into neutral and taking the emergency brake off.
Yeah.
If I think you might have been around somebody else who's tripping who had a bad trip. Is that something you tell them to try to get them out of their stuck place? Or is there anything that you have to say or any techniques for getting somebody out of a bad trip?
Yeah. Well, are you sober or are you tripping too? You know.
Either one.
Okay. Your absolute best friend in this experience, especially when it gets bad, is your breath. Your breath is your friend. Breathe. Get the person to breathe. And if you can tell them with some certainty that this will pass, but you must breathe and you must be with it, do your best to not go around it. You know, let it wash over you. And that's the best advice. That's probably the only advice that there really is. I mean, in those early trips, a couple of times, the very first trips, I poked my head up a couple of times and said, Brian, this is bad, man. What the hell? And he said, well, that's just this part of the trip. I'm like, well, that's no answer. But it was. It was an answer. And I've used that because when I do journeys, there's always 10 minutes where it's dicey. Like, what the hell did I get myself into? That's true today. Not as much anymore, but it still can come up where you're just like, oh, hell. And I have like a toolkit, and I'll just say, that's just this part of the trip. And I don't put a lot of energy into it. So if you can get them to breathe, don't resist it. You can tell them, trust that it will pass, breathe, be with it. But you've got to have some conviction behind that so they can get it, you know.
My husband gave me Valium once, and I dropped 2 kids, and never could have done that and gone to work. They decided to train me on the cash register.
Oh, no.
A record store. Bad idea.
Setting.
Freaking out here.
Yeah.
So he got me down with Valium. I really don't remember what happened after. I just remember what happened to get to a pay phone to make the phone call to say, hey, I'm tripping. I took 2 hits. That was the last time I did anything like that too, by the way.
Yeah, now you know.
Is it time?
Kara?
Do you want to I mean, do you guys want to keep going, or do you want to convene and have people ask her privately, and what's the
No,
vibe?
if we're having a party, why not?
Let's have a party.
Yeah. Let's just
Keep
party.
going, okay.
Yeah, what the hell? Yeah.
Now, I know from having spoken with you about some of these things in the past that you describe grounding.
Oh, yeah.
Along with the breathing.
Yeah, there's certain times when I'll go lay on the concrete with most of my clothes off, and I put my tongue on the concrete too. Well, really, when you're especially with like LSD or sometimes with seeds, I find I'm getting really heady, and I go downstairs, and that energy just pours out of my head through my tongue onto the concrete. It works. I mean, it's all empirical. Believe me, that well. Yeah.
I'm curious about 2 things. One is, how often do you journey, and then
Have you ever had a journey, like maybe in the beginning when you were starting, where it was bad and you avoided going again for a while, or you were afraid to go back?
Yeah, yeah. Well, these days I try to do maybe 3 a month, and sometimes practicalities intervene. Once in a while I do MDMA just for fun. Yeah, there's been times where it was hard. I remember setting up a seed trip 5 times and just putting the seeds back in the freezer. And I got up in the morning and I said, I just can't do this. And that was after many, many trips. But eventually I just said, this is the work. I just can't stop for that. And so I have overcome the fear. I haven't eliminated fear in a journey. There's times when I experience fear, but I don't let that stop me. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid of those fears now at all. That's gone. I go in because I'm going in. And that's just pure practice. I've done it a lot. And I have built up a confidence that I've done it a couple of 100 times. I can do it, another one. And I don't really spend a lot of energy on that. But it's always sometimes hard to put the shit in your mouth. It's like, I know it's coming. And part of it's not going to be any fun. And part of it's going to be Christ and angels, and it's going to be phenomenal. But that part is not what you go in there for. That's a side effect. Really. Yeah, you had a...
I was going to ask it. As far as, like, when in your experience with different mediums, like LSD, and you've got, you said mushrooms, didn't have such a good time, versus your seeds, versus anything else that you've tried. How did you come to realize that, one was more beneficial to you than the other?
Yeah.
Do you always have the same type of journey? You know what I mean? Is the context of the journey the same? Just, I don't know. I haven't experimented with many.
Like
a few different things over the years, but yeah.
Finding things that you work well with is important. And it's not the same for everybody. Mm-hmm. I had a friend, he just loved 2CB. And I did it, and it was like, there's a lot of heat, but no light. It was like a lot of grinding, and I just couldn't really get anything out of it.
John Summer, or one other.
But, I have found LSD to be fantastic for, like I say, drilling down.
Right.
Now, is there something better? I don't know. It's available. I was able to get a hold of it. So there could be things out there. The seeds are available. They're cheap. They're wonderfully integrated. They take stuff that's been laying around inside of you, and you kind of gather it up, and you go, oh, okay, that's what's going to happen here. They're really good for that. I would say they're more integrative than LSD. LSD is about jackhammering for me, and some integration, but the seeds are highly integrated.
Would you say the prayer sort of thing that you do before is just kind of gearing you up to anything you encounter? It's your own shit. It's your own stuff. You've already dealt with it. We're just going to deal with it a little bit more.
The prayer is out of respect.
Well, yeah.
Mainly, yeah.
I was wondering if you're used to it now. But if there's an easier way to just kind of gear yourself up to not have that fear that something outside is going to come and get you.
Well, I think that comes with experience.
Yeah.
Because I don't have that fear. I know there's going to be enough difficult stuff with the things I have to work with. Yeah, like I said, we've slain the monster, but we got another one that's maybe just as bad, except that it's our monster. It is.
You know where it's coming from.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole point. That is the whole point. Yeah, Karen.
Just about the scary stuff that comes up. I do mushrooms. I've done quite a few of them in some very intense trips. I said I've done mushrooms and quite a few experiences, and saying something about the scary stuff. I also feel like Kara does, that going into it isn't the scary stuff I see that I'm afraid of, and I have seen some evil. I've been into hell. I've been a serpent on the floor hissing and primal screaming, and understanding later that it was, well, even in the middle of the trip I understood this. I knew exactly what it was, and it directly related to someone in my life who was downright evil to me and abusive. And it was terrifying, and my partner was there, and he was not partaking, but he has training in such a way that he knew that it was important that he remain calm and not get disturbed by what he was seeing. And I don't know if that was helpful or not. I mean, it certainly wasn't a bad thing at all. There was another trip I had where it was actually very good that he held his ground, because I had some very scary physical symptoms that were happening. But so for me, that's more of a bad trip. It's actually when things start getting physically difficult. And with mushrooms, I've had a lot of that. And a lot of times it's on the come down of the trip. I get this incredible sense of restlessness. Sometimes I feel like I can't breathe. And even though I remind myself to breathe, I still struggle with it. And it's always on the come down. And I don't know why it is. I've had the paralysis. I've had all this stuff. My eyes have been crossed for into the next day sometimes, because my muscles were so weakened. And that was one of the most important trips I had. And I was intensely emotional, very positive. So you never know. And yet I keep going back, because I also have a tremendous amount of work to do. And sometimes I swear in the come down, I'm never going to do this again. I'm just like, I can't take this. I feel like my body is being poisoned. I mean, and I don't know if it's worth the experience of it, but I go back, because there's something about it that's really worth doing. And every time I trip, I go to a different place that needs work. So I don't know. Anyway, for what it's worth.
Yeah.
Do you microdose also with LSD?
No. I've tried it. It's like, I'm not saying it's not worthwhile, but I mean, it isn't going to dig out trauma. It's just not going to do that.
Do you think there? Should I jump further? Okay. Do you think there's value in perceiving like the state that we go into with psychedelics as being something that can affect the world that's not just within our own psyche, but actually affect like the quantum field of reality?
I think it does.
So that's my wonder, and actually I want to encourage you to sit with ayahuasca in a group, because I feel like all of the work that we do in our internal psychological worlds, it feels like it's for the sake of this greater story. I feel like that's the medicine of the psychedelic gift in this crazy sick reality.
And the medicine has to meet the Western rational. The Western rational is the problem. It's also the solution in a way, but it must meet it. There's an irony here, which is European rationalism transplanted itself to this continent. This continent is like the heart of magic. The New World is the heart of psychedelic magic. And so the European rationalism has planted itself here and built little fences around itself and tried to be white European rational, while there's all this going around it. And the New World magic must meet that Western rational mind. We're not supposed to become Peruvians or something. There's a synthesis here that's happening. It has to happen. Here's where the problem is. This is where it's got to happen. So yeah, I think we're doing our part though, for sure.
Yeah, and the ally is an ally for a reason, right? Like that there is a greater magic at play, and probably a great reason why, like those vines are growing into the European white empire.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, now we have to start putting wood chairs.
Okay.
We have to, of course, kick out at 9. So.